Hey everyone! Today we're diving into a deeply personal psychological framework from Professor Hazel Ramos, all about transforming adversity into resilience. Now, this isn't just some dry clinical theory. We're talking about a lived experience, a real journey of strength, perseverance, and the absolute power of small actions to create monumental change in our lives. So, to kick things off, let's ground this entire explainer in one seriously profound question that Professor Ramos asks us to consider. What if the very things that hold us back are actually meant to ignite our spark? Well, to answer that, we have to start with a bit of a mystery from the 1980s. Picture this. A little 4-year-old girl comes home and she is suddenly covered in unexplained bruises. Naturally, her teachers immediately suspect abuse. They call the parents in, but the parents are just as shocked as the teachers. The reality, it turned out, was a hidden internal medical crisis that would change the entire trajectory of her life. Eventually, doctors figured it out. They diagnosed her with idiopathic thrombocytopenic purpura, or ITP. It's a highly scientific-sounding and incredibly rare disorder where the human body basically destroys its own blood clotting platelets. Back then, it had no known cause and, frighteningly, no known cure. We're talking about a situation where a simple bumped knee or a tooth extraction could literally mean days of continuous bleeding. But here is the massive plot twist. That little girl, the one given this daunting, terrifying prognosis, she grew up to be the very psychologist guiding us through this material today. Nearly 44 years later, Professor Hazel Ramos stands as a true expert in the field of psychology, having navigated this incurable condition every single day of her life. Living with a lifelong illness like that sparked a really deep curiosity about human endurance for her. Interestingly, she didn't actually start out loving psychology. She was originally studying mathematics and business, but facing that daily medical battle pushed her to make a huge transition into counseling and clinical psychology. She just had to understand how humans cope with deep, persistent suffering. And get this, her struggles weren't just medical. In a wild academic pivot, she actually completely bombed in college. We're talking failing 3 mathematics modules and 2 statistics classes. Her professor literally told her there was no hope for her. But the irony, she used that exact failure to relate to her future university students as a statistics teacher, and eventually she even became a vice provost. She learned how to befriend the very thing she struggled with the most. So the crucial turning point was how she reframed that classic, desperate question. Why me? For years, she agonized over why she had to suffer. But that question completely shifted from a victim's cry into a focused, scientific pursuit of meaning after a close friend, who had the exact same rare illness, tragically passed away. She realized she had to figure out why she was surviving and what kept people going. To find those answers, she totally flipped the script. She shifted from patient to researcher. During her PhD, she focused entirely on other teenagers facing severe physical struggles. She interviewed adolescents battling asthma, cancer, and lupus. She wanted to know the hard science behind what kept them moving forward despite the massive obstacles standing in their way. And wow, did this research completely reframe the concept of gratitude for her. She spoke to a teenager with lupus, an autoimmune disorder where sunlight can be incredibly dangerous. When asked what she wished for, the girl simply said, "I wish someday I could play again in the sun." While most of us are applying whitening creams and hiding from UV rays, this teenager just wanted to feel the sunlight. Talk about a stark reminder of the power of finding tiny things to be grateful for. Which brings us to a total paradigm shift. Professor Ramos completely redefines resilience for us. Normally, we think of resilience as bouncing back, right? Just returning to the status quo after a tough time. But she shifts it. True resilience is not just bouncing back, it is bouncing forward. It's finding the willpower to take a definitive step into an unknown future. Based on her extensive research and decades of lived experience, she breaks down this concept of bouncing forward into 3 highly actionable psychological components: hope, meaning, and endurance. Let's unpack these one by one so you can start applying them to your own life. All right, the first step in this framework is hope. And we're not just talking about some blind, toxic positivity here. It's maintaining that fundamental faith that no matter how difficult or painful the struggle gets, something good will eventually flow from it. It's the core belief that the struggle itself is simply not the final chapter of your story. Next up is meaning. Professor Ramos found profound meaning when a university student came up to her after a lecture and shared that hearing about her medical battles actually helped them face their own personal challenges. Sometimes the meaning of your pain is literally just that it becomes a survival guide for somebody else. And finally, we have endurance. Look, endurance isn't always glamorous or deeply philosophical. Sometimes you get through it simply because you have absolutely no other choice. It's surviving day by day. Much like those communities who wake up the day after devastating California wildfires and just start taking tiny incremental steps to rebuild. We are built to last. Now, to truly wrap your head around the gravity of her endurance, we just need to talk about a few key numbers. The first one is 150. In the medical world, a count of 150 represents the normal, healthy baseline for blood platelets in a human body. That's the baseline that keeps you from severely bleeding if you get a cut. Well, Professor Ramos recently had an amazing week where her platelet count hit 199. That is a very safe, incredibly healthy level above the baseline. And in the exhausting cycle of chronic illness, these are the beautiful, victorious days you have to celebrate. But contrast that with just 5 or 6 years ago. She was rushed to Glen Eagles Hospital with a terrifying platelet count of exactly 1. A single platelet. That was the only thing floating through her body, keeping her from bleeding to death. That is the sheer, intense reality of what she's had to endure. And that brings us to a vital rule about the nonlinear reality of resilience. When she hit that count of 1, she drove to the hospital in an absolute panic. But she gave herself a rule. She said, "I'll give myself 5 minutes to cry, panic, and grieve. But afterwards, I go to the doctor and ask, what's next?" It beautifully illustrates that resilience is not a straight line. It is perfectly okay to panic as long as you eventually take a breath and figure out the next step. So what is your daily action plan for the really hard days? First, cling to tiny moments of joy, like the day her demanding cat woke her up at 4:15 a.m. instead of the usual 4:30 a.m., granting her 15 extra minutes of rest. Take that joy. Second, extend radical kindness to others, because you literally never know what unseen illness they might be battling. And third, show absolute compassion to yourself when you are struggling the most. She actually sums up her entire journey perfectly with a lyric from a 1970s song, "Feeling pain is the hard way to know that you're still alive. But someday, someone will make you glad that you survived." It might really suck in the moment, but that pain is simply proof that you are still in the fight for another day. To wrap up this explainer, I'm going to leave you with her empowering final thought. What if our greatest struggles are actually the path to reaching our greatest potential? You know, you will never find out the answer unless you try. So today, be kind, be compassionate, and take one tiny step forward, because your biggest obstacle might just be the exact spark you've been waiting for.